But Brandon, let's move on. The next teams we're talking about, another top 25 battle between number 4, The Ohio State University, going up against number 9, Penn State. Before we get into everything, there was something I forgot to mention at the beginning of the podcast that I wanted to make a point for, that all of you on podcast services around the world, this means nothing to you because you can't see us. But Brandon, everyone on YouTube should rejoice. You want to know why they should rejoice, he says sarcastically? Because it's gotten cold enough to where the sandal gate is over. I am finally back to wearing gym shoes. So for now until, I don't know, spring, we don't have to hear a comment about looking at my feet during a segment. That's what I want. Like, this is the first podcast where I have retired the flip-flops for the fall. The weather have gotten colder. It actually rained a little today, so I didn't have soggy flip-flops today. And people don't have to complain about seeing my bare feet on a podcast.
Man, thank goodness.
Yeah,
I'm glad we were able to get that out of there.
I had to make that point. I had to make them know that I see the comments, I read the comments, and that they don't have to deal with it for now, the fall and the winter. But let's get into what we are really going to talk about, and that is Ohio State going into Penn State this weekend. Ohio State's kind of been on a roll. They've 4-0, beating teams like TCU, Rutgers, Oregon State, and then the big one, Tulane. I mean, I don't know how they got past Tulane. But then you got the Nittany Lions, who they are 4-0 as well. Haven't played as big opponents as TCU, but were kind of in a scare in some of their games, especially Appalachian State. The thing I want to ask you with this one, Brandon, is Ohio State should be the favorite in this one and are going to be the favorite, but how can the Nittany Lions upset the Buckeyes if they want to get the win this weekend?
Well, they need to go look at the game tape from TCU and from the TCU Ohio State game, and they need to be able to apply pressure to Dwayne Haskins the same way that TCU was able to. TCU did a really good job of getting right in Haskins' face. I mean, they were coming off the edge, they were coming fast, they were coming quick, they were coming strong, and that's what really had Ohio State out of their rhythm, especially in that first half. I mean, the score at halftime was, 14-13. TCU was up by 1 point at the half.
I believe you're right.
It was a really good half of football put in by TCU. They had to feel good after that one. They were only up by 1 point, but they were up in the ball game to a team that had been scoring points left and right and scoring points at will. So that's what they have to be able to do. TCU came in with a good defense, and they clearly showed it. Now, in the second half, it was the defense of Ohio State that really kick-started that team. I believe that it was the defense that ultimately won the game for Ohio State there because they didn't have enough offense that night. And it was due to a really good defense by TCU. They just continue to apply pressure. And if Penn State's able to do that, I think that they have a chance in this ball game. They also need to be able to score a lot of points because we've seen these two teams meet up before, and we've seen a good amount of points scored by both of these teams. So also, it's you also have to take a look and say about Penn State, they can't turn the football over because while, yes, here's a little bit of a recipe to beat Ohio State, but here's also the recipe that on the way that Ohio State will beat you. They will apply a lot of pressure. They are going to make some big plays defensively. That's just what they do. They are in your face. So Trace McSorley, if he does not come and if he is not on his A game, if he's not ready for them, he is not going to play well. If he is unable to escape the pocket, if he's unable to throw outside of the pocket, and if he's only going to solely hope that he stays in the pocket and that's what he's going to do, he is not going to have a great day because what Ohio State does is they get you out of the pocket on the run. How are you going to what kind of passer are you on the run? How effective, how efficient are you there? Because that's a lot of what they do. They roll you out. They do not allow you to stay comfortable. That is what we're going to see a lot of from Ohio State, but that's also what Penn State needs to do to Dwayne Haskins. While Haskins is actually very good both ways, if you get right in his face, and that's again what TCU was doing, especially in that first drive that Ohio State had down in the red zone. TCU was coming right off the edge. It was a Dwayne Haskins pass to the left corner of the end zone, and TCU, one of the defensive ends for TCU, just jumped right up in the air, tipped that ball. I mean, they were there, they were fast, they were quick, they were ready. It was a really good showing, I think, by TCU's defense. Even though they lost, they had to have felt good. They should have felt good about themselves after that one. But that's what Penn State needs to be able to do this weekend. They have to be able to bring a lot of defensive pressure against Haskins.
See, and the thing that I look at is, of course, the Penn State defense versus the Ohio State offense is going to be the main battle. But I'm looking at a different side than you are. If yours is point A and minus point B on the priorities list, you mentioned it. Trace McSorley has got to have himself a game. And here's the thing I wonder in my head is, what kind of a game, and I'm looking numbers-wise, and I know people don't like when you look numbers-wise because, yeah, you can have a mediocre stat line but still look good in the game, or you can have a amazing stat line but look like you played like poop in a game. But the thing I look at when it comes to McSorley is, what stat line are we going to see? Are we going to see a stat line, for example, that we saw last weekend where he was only 12 of 19, 160 yards, but had 3 touchdowns and only 1 INT? Or are we going to see a stat line like we saw last year against Ohio State? Only 192 yards, 2 touchdowns, no INTs. Are we going to see one like Michigan State where he almost threw for 800 yards but had 3 touchdowns and 3 interceptions? Or are we going to see a stat line that we saw in the Big Ten title game in 2016 where he had almost 400 yards passing, he had 4 touchdowns, 0 INTs, and for me, I feel like McSorley, this might be asking too much of him with this current Penn State team, but I kind of have a feeling that in this game, the only way Penn State is going to beat Ohio State is if Penn State's offense says, you know what, we're going pound for pound with you. You score, we score. You score, we score. And that's the only way you're going to beat them, is if you keep pace with that offense. Maybe because I'm not super confident in the Penn State defense completely slowing down the Buckeye offense. They might knock them down a little bit to where it's like, oh, wow, they didn't have 50-some points in this game. They only had, 38 in this one. But, I mean, they might have to go score for them where it's like it was, I think, last year, 39-38 kind of game. And the good thing, though, for McSorley is that Nick Bosa will not be chasing him out there. Nick Bosa will most likely be out after having an abdominal surgery. He'll probably be out until November. So Nick Bosa's not going to be there. That means good things for McSorley because you're not going to have that added pressure of Bosa coming at you. But I feel like McSorley has to have a game where he has like 384 yards, 4 touchdowns, no INTs in order to beat Ohio State. The only question is he capable of that kind of a game this year with this team? Because we haven't seen that. The most passing yards he's had in a game this year against way less opponents is about 229. And the most touchdowns we've seen is 3, but he only had 160 yards in that game. What do you think?
See, now I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think that Trace McSorley has to have the game of his life. I think he needs to make sure that he does not turn the football over. Mm-hmm. But someone who I think could be in for a big day could be Miles Sanders. And the reason I say that is because look at the success that Darius Anderson had against Ohio State. He had 12 carries is all, but for 154 yards and 2 TDs. Of course, one of those was a 93-yard run, but he was running rampant against them. Mm-hmm. They could not stop him. They couldn't. They could not stop him. And he was, he was running all over the place. And again, I know 154 yards looks really good, but then you're like, you take out the 93-yarder and it's like, oh, he had an average day. But he really ran well against them. Mm-hmm. And he scored a pair of touchdowns. they struggled to contain him, because once he got into that secondary, he was gone. They couldn't catch him. And that was a couple of times against Ohio State's defense. While, yes, they're very good and they bring pressure up front, once you got in kind of to the middle layer and into the secondary, you could kind of see that TCU was able to expose that defense a little bit a couple of times, a couple of blown coverages, and a couple of times that you just were wondering, okay, Ohio State's defense is really good up front. How are they as you kind of go a little deeper there into the like I said, into that middle layer and into the secondary? So it's going to be one of those games where I don't think that Trace McSorley has to have the game of his life. I think he needs to. I also don't believe that he just needs to be a game manager or a field manager, however you want to say it. He needs to have a good game. I don't think he needs to go and score, throw for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that's the only way that Penn State will be able to win. He needs to make sure that at the end of the day, what he has in the touchdown column is, something good, but that there's a 0 in the interception and fumble column, because if there is not, I can say with certainty Ohio State will have won that game. I can guarantee that right now. But Miles Sanders, he needs to be able to be a guy that they can lean on a little bit to have some good runs. That offensive line needs to be able to open up some holes for him to be able to run, because once he gets into that second layer of defense, I think he could be off to the races a little bit on Saturday.
There's also another thing that worries me in this game when it comes to Penn State, and it's the same worry. I sound like a broken record here. It's the same worry I have for Stanford starting off the game. How are you going to start? Because through 4 games this season, here's the point totals at the end of one half for Ohio State. 42. Then in game number 2, they had, if my math is correct, let's see, 42 minus 7, 35? So 35 in game 2, only 13 points in game 3, and then game 4, back to 42.
Can I tell you why that doesn't worry me that much?
Why?
Because look at the one game that Ohio State played a good opponent. They had 13 points in the first half. That was all. So what I'm saying is that even if Penn State maybe starts off slowly, that doesn't mean that they can't hold down Ohio State to start a little slower either, because, yes, Ohio State was off to these big leads in all these in 3 of the 4 games where they didn't have a quality opponent. But in the one game where they did have a quality opponent, they were held down to 13 points. Now, I know TCU's a little bit different because they are known for actually having a pretty good defense, which is rare because they're in the Big 12. But I think that is something that you can look at and say, Ohio State has not bounced out to a luscious start in every single game. You have to look at that TCU game, but at the same time, understanding that TCU's defense is better than average.
And you kind of took the words out of my mouth. If I go with, I'm going to go through Penn State's now just so they're out there. 10 points against Appalachian State. Then you had only 14 points against Pitt. Kent State was their best game. That's where they had 28 points going into halftime. And then against the Illini, they had 21. It was a 21-17 game going into halftime. And using the Illini game as kind of the main one, because that one just happened this weekend. Penn State, to me, if they want to make any of this a game, they cannot play like they've played so far in first halves. They can't be going into halftime with 17 points, 14 points, 10 points, even 21 points. They have to be going in with at least 24 points if they want to have a chance to win this game. Because the other thing you have to look at is, yes, you bring up that TCU game, and you're absolutely correct. Ohio State went into that actually trailing TCU 14-13. But the question I'm going to ask you, and this might sound a little disrespectful to James Franklin, but I'm still going to ask it anyways, is James Franklin defensively with this defensive unit able to do the same things that TCU was able to do? Because one of the big things going into the TCU game, look at our comment section. No way the Buckeyes score so many points, which they ended up with 40. No way they end up with so many points. TCU going to keep them down with that Gary Patterson defense. Like, Gary Patterson, known for his defense. So, I mean, that kind of played dividends too. But also another thing that I kind of look at that one, and this isn't an excuse, this is something that's different between that one and this one. Urban Meyer's coaching this one. Like, yeah, I know we couldn't get that full comparison between the Urban Meyer and the Day coaching because, let's be honest, Ohio State played Tulane this week. They didn't need Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer could have been like, "Hey, I'm gonna go down to Maui and take this one off. You guys got this one, right? I'll just take one more week off. You don't have to pay me." And they still would have won 49-6. So I mean, there's not really one, but for me, that's another thing that kind of puts a little feather into the hat of Ohio State is that they've got their guy back. They've got Urban Meyer back coaching this one, and I just fear the big thing in Penn State. It's not that like. I don't fear it as much as I did Stanford, even though I probably should. I have more confidence in Penn State playing up for this game than I did Stanford playing up for Oregon. But I feel like with this Ohio State team, that if Penn State finds itself in a 28-7 hole or even worse, a like 42-10 hole, 42-17 hole, I think like if that's the case, call it at halftime, this game's over. Like, that's what I fear could happen, even though in my crystal ball I don't see that happening, if that makes any sense.
No, I get it. I don't necessarily see that happening. I think that I don't know if we'll have a game that was as close as it was last year because like last year was just absolutely crazy. That was a crazy game. It was really fun, minus the outcome. But I think only because Penn State should not have lost that game. They had it in hand, and it was really unfortunate to see them gift it away and wrap it with a bow. But I think that we're going to see a game that's close. Similar to that, not quite that, not that close, not like you're literally biting your fingers off close, but we're going to see a good game. It's a Big Ten matchup. It's a Big Ten East matchup. It's going to be a very good football game. Now, some people may say, hey, we'll give the edge to Penn State because the game is at home. You can do that. But I think at the same time, you also have to look at, okay, let's see everything else here. This Ohio State defense has been really just attacking opposing offenses and really getting into opposing backfields. That's what Ohio State's been so good at. That is one of the reasons why they were able to beat TCU. I mean, that game was really close, 14-13 at halftime. We've now mentioned it a number of times. You go into the second half, the reason that Ohio State was able to really get their momentum, it was that defense. Yes, Dwayne Haskins had a couple of touchdowns to his credit, and he played much better in the second half. But that defense was absolutely swarming in that second half. That is for certain. Without that defense, without them getting their touchdowns, the interception, the touchdown in the first half, I think it was either on a block kick or block punt, and then the touchdown in the second half, which was a what was that? Was that another? Or am I thinking about the same one? They either had 2 or 3 touchdowns defensively. If they don't have those 2 touchdowns, if they don't have those scores, it is a different ball game.
I was gonna say, I've got a laptop. I could look this up. And
so do I.
Remember it. So you're talking just defensive touchdowns. In the first quarter, they had one that was a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Then they had a interception go for a touchdown. And then
so they had the 2. So they had the 2. I was talking about the one twice, but I mean those 2 plays, humongous. I mean those and they also the one in the second half too. It kind of kept the momentum going because Haskins had the touchdown pass in the third quarter, but it also had the what am I looking at here? There it is. Okay, I'm skipping over things. It was that Draymond Jones 28-yard interception return, still in the third quarter, not much longer after that touchdown pass
for the defense.
That I'm sorry, folks, I'm sick too, so just let me be this week. But that is another thing that kept the momentum with Ohio State. This defense for Ohio State is too good. they're just too good.
And let me ask you this, and you talk about the defense. This is the last thing I kind of wanted to ask. Before I ask it, though, I'll make this statement. You do mention that, like, some people might want to give Penn State a little bit of an edge because it's on the road. Yeah, that game against TCU
because it's at home.
Well, it's at home for Penn State. It's on the road for Ohio State. Yeah, that TCU game was a neutral site, but technically it was what? We did the math on the podcast that week. It was like, what, a 20-minute drive from TCU to Jerry World. So it was basically
we actually did get a commenter that told us that Ohio State travels really well, and that they have actually a chapter there that's really big, that's really popular. And I think they might have been right because there were plenty of Ohio State fans there.
I want to ask you this. Nick Bosa, of course, the defense is more than one player. I'm looking at, this is Land Grant Holy Land. It's the SB Nation site for Ohio State. In their article, they are reporting, or not they're reporting, but they say The Athletic reported that Nick Bosa's dad told them that Nick would be out until November. Recovery times for this core muscle surgery, they vary. Le'Veon Bell took about 6 weeks to recover from it. And then the Cleveland.com, however, they have said, Bill Landis, that this injury is 100% fixable for Nick Bosa. The thing I want to ask you is, for this game, because we know he's going to be out for sure, does it hurt the Ohio State defense, and how much does it hurt their defense against Penn State, having Nick Bosa not there? Well, not playing for them.
I don't know. You tell me. Nick Bosa went out at some point in the TCU game. It didn't seem to hurt him.
No, it didn't hurt him in that game.
So there you go.
So
there you go. There's your question answered. It ain't gonna hurt. Nick Bosa. It's just gonna make them that much better when Nick Bosa's back. But without him there, all right, Nick, we'll hold down the fort for you, buddy. You take your time to heal. They're fine. There is no issue.
I guess I just look at it, too, as like, I look at last week as like a game that never happened and a game that shouldn't have happened, because it's one of those, let's be honest, it should have happened because Tulane probably got some big money, some good money for playing Ohio State, even though they got blown out by Ohio State. But like, you look at that game and you go, there, as an Ohio State guy, if you're trying to pull anything from Ohio State, you're not learning anything from that game unless you're Urban Meyer nitpicking stuff, because Urban Meyer can find a needle in a haystack when it comes to negative things to pick out about his team. But no, I guess you're right. I mean, that defense didn't miss a step after losing Nick Bosa. Yeah. Why would it be a problem against Penn State? But any final thoughts before we move on into our last segment?
It's going to be a great game. Can't wait to watch.
This will probably be the best game of the week, in my opinion. Like, this is going to get
easily, yes,
Ricky Widmer stamp game of the week for the Primetime Podcast, if we start doing that. That's not a thing that we have done. But this is where you guys come in. Let us know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Let us know what you guys think about the Penn State-Ohio State game. Who's going to win? What teams do you like? What do you like about this team? Don't like about that team? Let us know everything down below in that comment section.